why this push to $80 games, which is going to be ultimately a shattering of the industry, is going to benefit Xbox in a big way. But, gentlemen, we're going to go first to Korkenstein. And Korkenstein, I am going to read your 40,000 viewed tweet that I think really sparked today's conversation regarding of how this not only is going to push people to Xbox. I think $80 games, not only from Nintendo Switch 2, it is going to be a ring effect where you're going to see this come marching in, and not in 2026, ladies and gentlemen. I think that this generation that we're currently in is going to see $80 games come the way of 2025. And if I were a betting kind of a guy, and I'm not, Korkenstein and Fuzzy, I would say some of the first games that go to $80, $90, $100 games, Grand Theft Auto is a given. We've already heard about that. But I also think you're going to see potentially the next Madden, the next 2K basketball. I think that Ghosts of Yotai is Sony's first $80 game. I really believe that. Now, again, that's just pure speculation. But I think that people in the industry, the money people, are going to look at Nintendo and say, well, Nintendo didn't just open the door. They literally kicked the door off its hinges and it's on the floor. And if Nintendo was doing it, you can bet your bottom dollar, pun intended there, that the EAs and the 2Ks and the PlayStations and even Xbox could bring their games to $80. Now, Xbox is usually the last one to do that. And I think that they would hold off from doing that because this industry F-up that we're seeing, Korkenstein and Fuzzy, is going to be, there's going to be a cause and effect here. And Xbox ultimately is going to win because of Xbox Game Pass. But I want to read Korkenstein's tweet that took off like a bat out of hell. And it says simply this. So let me get this straight with a couple of dots. Xbox opens up their ecosystem to put more games on other platforms, which in turn helps with dev costs, feeds the Game Pass machine, and keeps prices affordable for gamers. And he goes on to say, reaction, Xbox dead, DED. They hate their consumers, second-class citizens, as we've been called. He goes on to say Nintendo would rather keep exclusivity and make consumers pay for it with $80 to $90 games to help with costs. Reaction, it makes sense. The industry is expensive, so it's okay. Korkenstein, fantastic tweet. Exploded as it should have. 40.1 thousand views, almost 1,000 likes, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that I don't think any of us could have guessed. When we knew that the Nintendo Switch 2 announcement direct was happening, we all kind of assumed, and again, this is, we're just being consumers, that we would get potentially a $400 Switch 2. Some of us thought, $450, $499, right? That's because it's new hardware. And hardware is, I've said this before, and you've heard other people on my podcast say it. These manufacturers, these publishers are no longer going to take L's for their hardware to get you by software. They're not doing that. If they can make a profit, even if it's a couple of bucks up front, they're going to make a profit, and they're not going to put that loss onto themselves. They're going to put the cost onto the consumer. So if you want the new console, you're paying for what the console is. But I don't think, Korkenstein, any of us could have, in our best guesses, said that Nintendo was going to be the first publisher to say, yeah, you want our games? They're $80, ladies and gentlemen. And again, $70 games started with Sony. Everyone jumped on board right afterwards. People are going to jump on board to $80 games, and I think it's going to be an immediate situation, not something that happens next year. I think it happens this year. Let's get your thoughts on not only your tweet, but more importantly, Korkenstein, how this could ultimately be a boost for Xbox Game Pass, because you got to admit, folks, maybe Xbox isn't your platform of choice, but they are putting games pretty much everywhere. And even if you are a PlayStation gamer, whether it's diehard, whether it's console warrior, or whether it's just casual, and more than likely you're a casual, right? Because they have so many casual players that's what makes up PlayStation 5's biggest consumer. There's going to come a point, Korkenstein, where you're going to look at $80 games and be like, I don't know so much about that. I mean, eggs are costing as much as a pack of meat, and now you want $80 games, and there might be some microtransactions in there. Does the $80 include a season pass? Do I get the DLC with that $80? No, you're getting the regular edition. And the season pass is probably another $30. If there's any outfits or the skins, that's probably another $20 or $30. By the time you're done, you're buying $120 games. So you look at the Xbox Game Pass and you go, wait a second, $20 a month and I'm getting all of that, including Call of Duty? Yeah, I think I'm going to move over to Xbox. Let's get your thoughts, man.
Yeah, like I said at the start of the show, yeah, I was just surprised. I was like, just barely waking up, kind of just going through the news, and then kind of looked and was like, this is stupid. I got to tweet about this. I didn't expect it to kind of blow up the way it did, but I mean, this is it. That was just basic common thinking. That's all that was. We look at it, and it's because Xbox takes so many hits for so many unnecessary reasons. And we got to look at the hypocrisy here of what Xbox does versus what Nintendo does. And that's all I kind of did was just point out the two different business models and strategies. It's silly that people are blaming this on Phil and Xbox. That they're not competing. No, this is just a different business model. The way they want to compete is putting the gamers first, putting the customers first. They're showing that, yes, you can subsidize these costs and think of a different way to bring in that revenue while still getting your games, displaying your art out there for all to see and to all to play. And that's by getting rid of the shackles of old that you have to have exclusives and you have to lock down your ecosystem and you have to force gamers into somewhere they have to play, not where they want to play. And that's what basically Nintendo's doing. They're still an antiquated company in that sense. And to be honest, like I said, I think this is a big issue with how not only gamers have treated Nintendo. It makes sense. A lot of I grew up with Nintendo. I had an NES, I had a Game Boy, I had a Super Nintendo. And you got to think that these are classic IPs that people that I grew up, like my age, they're having kids. And they're wanting to get their kids into games and IPs that they loved as a child. That's Nintendo. That's Mario, that's Metroid, that's Link, that's those classic standard IPs, and even some of their kids are having kids now. And they're gonna that's kind of what feeds Nintendo is this nostalgia. And I'm not going to, diss Nintendo here. They have reinvented these games compared to where they are every year. They kind of do something a little bit new. They change up the gameplay. Look at, Breath of the Wild for, Zelda was and Link. That was a massive change from what was happening before. So they do reinvent some stuff. They do try and not give you a Madden or 2K NBA every year.
Yeah.
So I'll give them their credit there. But I think to go back to what I was saying, Nintendo drives or is heavily based on nostalgia.
Yep.
And that's kind of what drives a lot of that Nintendo sales. A lot of what Nintendo does is purely based off nostalgia, and they know that they can get away with it. And the second part of that is the gaming media doesn't really call it out. They're scared of the Nintendo blacklist, honestly. That's speculation again. But that's just kind of what I believe, is that, they don't want to piss off Daddy Nintendo. And I mean, you could look at it now. Look at the articles that came out since they announced the $80, $90. Not one op-ed piece that is calling it out, that is saying this is bad for the industry, this is bad for consumers, this is bad for gamers. What they do is they try and explain it. This is why it's happening. Oh, it's tariffs. This is why. It's import costs. This is why. There's not one that's been holding or tried to hold Nintendo accountable for it. They say fans are upset. No, you should be upset. These supposedly so-called journalists that are, supposed to be reporting on the industry, and that this affects them as well. Yeah, you get the game for free. So when you record, when you do the review, so you don't have to pay for it, but you can at least try and sympathize and see what it is as a consumer. That's part of your job as a journalist, is to kind of report on that. And the fact that they're not, they say, like I said, fans are upset, or this is why. What happened when Xbox decided multi-platform? They blew up op-ed piece after op-ed piece after, Xbox is dooming its fans. They're doing this. Not one so far for Nintendo, and that's part of the problem. We allow Nintendo and we allow PlayStation to dictate. This is why they are in the positions that they are in right now, to where we're seeing, an almost $1,000 PlayStation Pro if you wanted to get all the bells and whistles. That's not even with tariffs. Just imagine what it's going to be now with it, once you get, all the import costs in and stuff like that. It's silly, and a lot of this is because we put this on ourselves as gamers, but we also don't have a voice that will, other than content creators, but we really don't have a media voice that will represent the consumer in a possible in a way that will not harm them, in a sense. So that's why they play it safe, and it's sad. Xbox gets all this smoke for doing something that is great for consumers. It's also great for their business. Don't get me wrong. They're not doing it out of the greatness of their hearts. They're a company. They're looking to make money. That's the whole point. Number one business model of a company, profit. It's the driving force. But I think Xbox is showing a way how to do that while still getting, the revenue they need, but giving a quality product, giving something great that allows gamers to be what they are, and that's gamers, and play games and join in a hobby that they love and that they've grown up on for years and years and years. Gaming shouldn't be, and I'm going to quote Paris on this, an elitist hobby.
Yes.
He made such a great tweet about that. And it's true. It shouldn't be an elitist hobby. We shouldn't, I mean, maybe this would make sense, if the economy was a little bit, but like you said, we're paying an arm and a leg just for eggs and gas and so much stuff. If we had, the paychecks, and the pay gap and all of that increased for us, this would make sense because we can afford it. But now they're price locking people out, and of all people, Nintendo is just, it's a bad move in my eyes. I don't think Nintendo, I think they're trying this. They're going to see where it goes. And the whole industry as a whole right now is watching Nintendo. They're going to see what's happening. They're going to let Mario World, Mario Kart World release. And if it takes off, if they see crazy number of sales, like you said, boom, Madden, NBA 2K, and those games have microtransactions. Grand Theft Auto 6, probably
dude.
easy $100. That's a no-brainer right there. Everybody in the industry right now is watching Nintendo. I don't want to say that I hope this fails, because I never want to see a developer fail. I never want to see, gamers lose something that is, I want them to play great games. I want them to have fun. But, this is something I kind of do wish that, doesn't get the success it needs, because we have to set a standard as consumers. We have to set a standard, somewhere. And I wish we had a bigger voice, other than our wallets. But I wish we had somebody that is a known reporter from IGN, from VGC, from Polygon, from somewhere, to really step out and make a great op-ed piece that calls out why this is bad for the industry, and we just don't.
Yeah. You know what? I want you to go next on this.
Yeah.
And this is part 2 of the conversation. That's why I said it was going to be multi-tiered. And because this is a conversational podcast, I gotta get Korkenstein's hot take on this. Look, you keep saying that it's bad for the industry, and you're not wrong. It is terrible for the industry, and it does set off a standard that EA and 2K and Sony and Ubisoft and the rest of these places are going to look at and say, yes, because it was a fall in line situation when Sony went to $70. We all gave them shit for it, and it became the standard industry, the industry standard, I should say. That is going to happen here. Now, I listen, folks, you'll hear me admit that I'm a part of the problem. I'm buying a Switch 2. In fact, I'm buying 2 up front and another one for Mrs. Boom. Now, does that make me a monster? No, that makes me a gamer who has family, who does get together and use Nintendo as an opportunity to hang out with one another. If I'm not playing Animal Crossing with Mrs. Boom on a daily basis, which we have about 1,000 hours each in that game, right? We paid $60. We got 1,000 hours, and we still play every day. I'm either online or sitting right next to my nephew Tyler, and we're playing Smash Brothers. We're playing Mario Kart. We're playing, you name your favorite flavor. We have all the Nintendo Switch first-party games. When I buy one for me, I buy one for him. It's like clockwork. That's the way it works. We're Nintendo fans. I don't make an excuse for being a Nintendo fan. I'm also not going to be full of shit and be like, yeah, you know what? I'm just not going to buy Mario Kart World. Listen, folks, you can call me a boob. You can call me a part of the problem. I could buy 4 games a year at $80. Do I want to do it? No, I do not want to do it. That's why I have Xbox Game Pass. That is why I have Ubisoft Plus. That is why I see a Steam sale nowadays. Like, for instance, it was just told to me that the entire Prince of Persia series, everything is $8 on Steam. I just bought it. I don't even play on Steam, for Christ's sake. I don't have a PC to play it, but eventually I will. So I'll spend $8 to get the whole collection. The same thing I did with Resident Evil. I have every Resident Evil game on multiple platforms. But when it was like $30 for everything, yeah, I bought it. I bought it on Steam because eventually Steam is going to come to Xbox and I'll be able to play them there. But Korkenstein, where I kind of want to focus your attention is ultimately what this does for third place Xbox. I think that consumerism is a hot topic right now. I think that people's budgets, because of what's going on, the real life things that are going on that we don't talk about on podcasts because we hate politics. Politics is filthy, but it's also still a reality. And one of the things that we all are grown men and women here understand that when you have to put food on the table, you have to pay the power bill or your cell phone bill or even your mortgage or your rent, the first thing to go is entertainment, Korkenstein. And entertainment in the form of gaming is a luxury. It's a luxury thing. It's not something that you need to live. Some people will argue with that and say, oh my God, I'll die without video games. I'm not going to fight you on that because I'd probably feel the same way. But you have to budget yourself the way I do. I budget myself because I'm a pensioner and I live off a great pension. But like I said before, and people make fun of me, it has a ceiling. Right. So, you know where you can go and where you can't go, because I'm not trying to get into debt. Mrs. Boom and I are trying to buy our first home, and it's becoming even more and more difficult every day that the earth turns around. So here we are where the freaking Nintendo, like, it's still crazy to me that they broke down the door for $80 games. And then you look at third place Xbox and you look at your tweet and you say, wait a second. Xbox is not closing studios. Yeah, they had layoffs. Yeah, they closed some studios. They just opened up another one. They're going to open up more. They're going to buy some more studios. They're going to buy another publisher potentially. And all of that is investment into what? Xbox Game Pass, which currently is $20 a month. And this year alone, you've already gotten South of Midnight, you got Avowed, you got Adam Fall, you have Doom: The Dark Ages coming, you have potentially the Oblivion remake that's potentially shadow dropping next week. That's the new rumor. You have the new Call of Duty. You got the Gears of War collection rumored to be dropping this year. And it just keeps going and going and going. At some point, I think that people are going to look at this and say, I could no longer ignore Xbox. I got to get a console. And this is where we have to wonder if the marketing heads at Xbox see an opportunity here. And I think the opportunity is, hey, we have a lot of stock that didn't sell for the Series X and the Series S, especially the Series S. And now, because of Grand Theft Auto 6 only being on next-gen consoles, this is a perfect storm for Xbox, at least in my opinion. And I don't have a business degree, folks. What the hell do I know? But I'm just saying, if you just read the room and you say, okay, $80 games, ridiculous. You have a service that's $20 a month that gives you so many different games, it's egregious, right? And then you then take that information and you say, wait a second, Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to move consoles because it's only on next gen. It's going to be on the Series S, the Series X, the PS5 Pro, the PS5, and not on Steam, not on PC, console first. This is an incredible opportunity for Xbox to get people to subscribe to the best value in entertainment. Not just gaming, ladies and gentlemen. I'm saying entertainment as a whole. Let's get your thoughts, Korkenstein.
Yeah, this is, like you said, it's a perfect storm for Xbox. And this is where I kind of made reference to it earlier is, people trying to say this is because Xbox isn't competing. No, they are. This is Xbox competing. They're just choosing to go a little bit more pro-consumerism with it versus, trying to nickel and dime their consumer base. This is this is kind of be where, like I said, this is the tipping point where everybody's kind of watching to see what happens with Nintendo. Nintendo's number one. If they can pull off $80 games, it's going to set a standard that will continue into other ones. But with Xbox, like you said, it's a perfect storm, and this is going to force more people, I think, into the Xbox ecosystem. I don't want to say out of necessity, because like you said, it's a luxury. It's not something that people have to buy every year. For me, I think it is because life is hard enough. We need a release. We need the entertainment. We need something. You can only watch so many movies, gaming, or listen to so many albums, but art is a release from reality, and we need that. And that's why I love gaming, is because it allows you to escape to a new world, and kind of get away from the awful one that you may be living in currently, or something, whatever you may be dealing with in your life. And that shouldn't be that shouldn't be something that people will have to pay $80 to $90 just to enjoy. And that is that's where I think Xbox is coming in clutch, and where people will see, I can enjoy gaming, I can get that release, I can get that escape, because they're making it very affordable for me, because this is a hobby that should be loved and enjoyed. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of people start shifting to Xbox and to something that's more affordable. And don't get me wrong, the Xbox handheld is probably going to be pretty expensive. I'm expecting $800, $900.
I'm thinking 7 to 8. That's what I was originally thinking. Yep.
Yeah, if it's going to be on par with the ROG Ally, which is currently, in my opinion, probably one of the best handhelds out. Hardware makes sense. That's very expensive to develop for. Same with gaming, but you can offset a lot of those costs. So with going back to it again, I think this is going to be a great move. This is great for Xbox. If Xbox stays with their strategy, Xbox stay with what you're doing. I know it gets kind of crazy. It gets kind of rough. You get a little bit of a pressure and, narratives start building. And then all of a sudden you feel like you got to shift. But if you stick with what you are doing and multi-platform and putting the gamers first in this sense, this is going to pay off, especially when that next gen comes. This is the Game Pass machine that Game Pass and Xbox Series S. This is what drove the first of the generation. This is what propelled you guys during a COVID era where we're in the same kind of era right now where money was tight for a lot of people and things were becoming expensive. But you guys championed a Series S, which was an affordable console with Game Pass. You gave people options and a way to play and enjoy something at a cost that was affordable to them. Stick with that. If you deviate from that, you will be this will be the biggest ball drop of the century. You have everything you need to be to put you guys where you need to be while giving gamers something great. Don't F it up.
Don't step on any rakes, please. Please don't step on any rakes, Xbox. I understand that, and they're making money hand over fist. And
yeah,
probably when you consider it's not like Sony. Like Sony's main driving of success is PlayStation. It used to be their electronics, but not so much anymore. And they depend heavily on PlayStation, and PlayStation does really well for them. Nintendo's the same thing. Nintendo doesn't have, of course they have Legos and things of that nature, but their driving force is their platform, right? It's Nintendo. Xbox is a bit different. Xbox, yes, is a big part of Microsoft, but they're not the only part. There's Windows, there's all these, things that Xbox and Microsoft do that make this ginormous machine. But I want to turn the mic over to Fuzzy Belvedere. Fuzzy, I want to open up the same way with but by all means, brother, you killed it as always. And again, this was a multi-layered conversation, so we're going to get two different opinions from Fuzzy as well. But Fuzzy, I want to open up with a tweet from Paris Lilly that, of course, Korkenstein referred to. And Paris, who may be in the chat, I think he was in Seattle, so I don't know if he's actually listening, but is one of the voices on social media that not only do I enjoy listening to, I respect highly. Now, we don't always agree, and I'm sure he doesn't agree with me always, especially when it comes to the Xbox tax thing, but he is a voice that I respect and I appreciate. He put out a tweet, and I'm going to read it verbatim, ladies and gentlemen. Paris goes on to say, saying that games were $100 in the 90s isn't a reason to justify prices steadily rising in 2025, especially when our salaries aren't rising as well. I literally had this conversation with Mrs. Boom this morning. He goes on to say, gaming shouldn't be an elitist hobby. I'll argue value for consumers every time, as he should. So $80 games, they come out, and one of the things that we didn't see, very similar to what Korkenstein had to say, was a pushback by the industry. And again, I put myself out here on Front Street, not because I feel I have to, but I'm a transparent, podcaster, content creator. I don't like these prices. I think these prices are egregious, but I'm also going to buy this console. What it's going to do for me regarding in games is I am going to be less inclined to buy as many games as I have sitting here. I have 100+ physical games and nearly 60 digital games on my Switch 1. I buy a lot of stuff, and I import too, especially with the arcade shooters. I'm going to be less inclined to spend money on Nintendo software because $80 times 4 is enough, in my opinion. Fuzzy Belvedere, let's get your thoughts on the opening salvo, and then we'll get your back end conversation and comments on how this potentially benefits Xbox. Yeah, take it away, brother.
Okay, so I'll start off with the hardware pricing. Now, seeing some recent news that a few in the chat have already broken as far as the delay on the pre-orders,
yep.
I had a different assumption based on the pricing. Like for the console itself, I didn't see much issue with the pricing. Like I kind of figured it was going to be around that. I know a lot of people were expecting it to be closer to 300 or even 400, based on something that was talked about just before the announcement of the Nintendo Directs, where they were conscious or aware of pricing for their consumer base or something like that. So people automatically assumed that it was going to be around 300 for some reason. And I understand that, but given Nintendo's history, and they like to make the most amount of money off of the oldest of hardware. And this hardware, while old, it's not as old. I mean, it is the previous generation equivalent or roughly around that ballpark. I figured it was going to be north of 400 or be 400. And then you'd have to buy the dock separately, but people kept on telling me, oh, they'll never sell it separately. It'll be included. And it's like, okay, well then it is going to be 450 or more. But I wasn't expecting, anything over 500, but 500, between 450 and 500 was kind of what I expected from get-go. And people told me I was crazy. But that being said, when you compare it to PC handhelds, it's within reason. Although the PC handhelds are a good bit more powerful, but they're not the PC handhelds aren't as powerful as the Series S. So in relative speaking, you're paying for the convenience of something that you can take with you. So the box, no problems really with the pricing. And I kind of assumed to some extent, but this is where, the old saying, you assume makes a, what out of you and me kind of thing.
Yes, it does.
I assumed they were forward thinking in the pricing structure, expecting the tariffs to affect their product. Now, yes, they did, like many other manufacturers that used to use China as their direct go-to. Like even the company I worked for up until 2021 did the same thing where, all right, we need to, from Trump's first term, I don't want to get into too much politics, but after his first term, they were like, all right, well, let's look at other alternatives to China. A lot of places did that, and that takes time. And some of those things are now online now, meaning like the factories are built or the contracts are written and the everything is flowing from those other, locations type of deal. Well, now that these tariffs are hitting those same locations, I was hoping that they kind of, built some of that into the pricing. Maybe it should have been more like 350, 400, and maybe the extra was in case so they could really look like the good guys that they normally do and say, well, we're going to eat that cost. I mean, they're along with Capcom, they're like one of the few where they actually pay their employees better than the industry standard in comparison to similar positions outside or amongst their competitors, even though I know a lot of people don't consider Xbox or PlayStation their direct competitors, but from an industry standpoint, from an employment standpoint, they tend to pay their employees better comparably. All of that said, considering that they're doing the delay to assess the tariffs, they obviously didn't consider that at all. I guess they figured they were safe enough with the manufacturing in Vietnam and that would not be a boiling point kind of thing. So we'll see where the pricing of the units go. So I originally, like I said, I didn't see any problems with the pricing on the hardware. But all of that said, now they're reassessing. We'll see if the thing goes to 550, 600 or more. But the game price, I laughed at people when they complained about the $70 games at the first generation or the beginning of this generation when they were like, well, we paid $70 for, cartridges back then. I'm like, and I hate calling people idiots, but I'm like, do you not remember that these things were hardware with a chip inside? That was most of the cost.
Yes.
Once you went to CDs or DVDs or Blu-rays, that cost was cut to a tenth of what it would have been. So yeah, they could charge similar prices, but their costs went way down in that regard. Other costs went up as far as the production aspect. That's something that they have to figure out how to get into control. And we'll see if AI becomes more of that sticking point to control those expenses, or just make smaller games to kind of keep the things within budget. But all of that stuff aside, an $80 game, for me, I won't say it prices me out of the market because like I've never been a Nintendo guy. I was always a Sega kid. This was probably a more appealing device considering it was a little bit more powerful or at least on par with the previous generation was, producing. So I kind of figured, well, maybe this is the time I give them another try, because I've never purchased a Nintendo product other than for my kids. We've had them in the house. Like my sister had one. She had the original NES and the Super NES. And then I think that was it for as far as video games and stuff when she got older and whatnot. But I like I said, I was always a Sega kid, never purchased a Nintendo anything for myself other than, well, actually, that was even for the boys, the little classic consoles. And they got tired of that quick after I beat them in Street Fighter too many times. So all of that said, I'm not a fan of the 80. It would be one of those things where I would wait for a sale, but from what I'm hearing, Nintendo doesn't believe in a thing called sale on their games.
They do not.
So it's like,
no.
There's not enough. It kind of kills the appeal, because for me, even with the original Switch, like a lot of the games that I would have been looking forward to, aside from like Mario's, probably some of those games are probably the only ones I have interest. Don't really have an interest in Zelda. All the other third-party stuff that was on that device, I could get on my Steam Deck. So that kind of killed me really looking at a Switch previous generation. This generation, we're getting more third-party support. I'm like, maybe that makes more sense for me at this time. But if they're going to be 80, even for the third party, then there's already a device I have in hand. Well, I don't have it set up right now, but it's in its carrying case. I have my Steam Deck. So a lot of those third parties I could buy for cheaper on Steam. So maybe they need to look at that. If people make big enough stink, maybe they do look at that, but it is what it is. But that kind of, spills into the next part of the question, where I saw that $80 for the, like, potentially for their third party games. Like we know, like, was it Donkey Kong Bonanza or whatever is going to be
$70. That one is $70. Yeah.
Yeah. So like if some of their other games are 80 and let's say third party is still 60 and 70, it doesn't make as much of a opportunity for the Xbox, ROG Ally X, whatever they call it, type of deal. But that does give Xbox a good opportunity. It's almost like a layup at that point that will allow them to look at, hey, third party will play better on that device because it's a PC handheld. Right. And you could probably buy the software cheaper. Now, the device might be more expensive, but it depends on what the chipset comes in at. Originally, I was under the impression it would be like maybe a Z1 or Z2, like the base chipset that they would go with. And then maybe an Extreme would be an upgraded version that they could offer at a higher price point. So let's say $550 for the Z1. And the Z1 Extreme would be like in the 700 range, or at least at the 600, but more than likely at the 700 range, because like Boom, or I think maybe Korkenstein may have said it earlier, we're probably seeing the end of subsidies from these platforms where they charge less to kind of get your foot in the door, so they can sell you the software and make the money back up on the back end, like they've done with most generations of consoles. But if this device winds up being the actual ROG Ally 2, which will be in direct competition with like the Steam Deck 2, I could see that device being a starting price at $650. Does Xbox kick them some subsidy money to keep it at the 600 range? Possibly. But if that device is at 600, I still think that's within reason, considering it's a bit more powerful, especially if it's like a ROG Ally 2. That's going to be more on par with this current generation's hardware. Maybe slightly better, but on a smaller power scale, so you can have some of that overhead to save on battery life and things like that. But if the games are still floating at the 60, 70 range, and you're looking at Steam, which a lot of people don't realize, having Steam on Xbox, because it's directly on the device and you have the option to either buy from Steam or buy from Xbox, that stands a better chance of making their store more competitive in pricing. Because if you look at digital stores now, they'll have developer or publisher sales and things like that. Every so often, they'll have certain seasonal sales. But Steam is having sales for, like, it seems like random stuff all the time. Hey, cozy game sale. Hey, RTS sale. Racing game sale. Like each week, it seems like it's a new sale. And then they have their bigger ones for like the winter and summertime frame. If those things are going to be going on, Xbox knows that they need to not have you want to peek over there to buy the game strictly from there. They're going to want you to buy the games there on their store. So whether they're giving back some of that percentage cut back to the developers to kind of keep price lower for on the storefront, or they eat some of that cost or whatever, eat some of their own 30% that they would normally take to keep competitive with Steam on the pricing. That's definitely going to be an advantage at that point for at least third-party software for their device, as opposed to something like the Switch. So it could be a great opportunity, but I say this in jest sometimes, but we've all seen them step on rakes. What seems sometimes to be the easiest or the most obvious, path for them to take, sometimes they go in the opposite direction. So they'll find some way that they could screw it up, where maybe there'll be like an extra, tax on the game or so, just something ridiculous. But in any event, if 80 or 90 is the new pricing, at least from the Switch end of things, and then it eventually trickles down to PC and other console platforms, then Game Pass becomes the even bigger bright spot in the gaming space. And I know people say that Game Pass is unsustainable, it's the problem with the industry. No, the problem with the industry is it comes down to sticking to budgets and keeping budgets within expectation for not just the consumer, but what the actual devs are capable of doing. And it's not to knock any studios or anything along those lines, but the key thing is they claim that customers always want a bigger and better world, a larger map and stuff like that. But every now and then we get tired of having maps where there's 80 million, collectibles we have to search around and find. If something could be, wrapped up in, let's say, 40 hours or less, we might be happier and might play more games. But if you have the average game is now pushing where it's 80 to 100 hours, and it's like you're kind of dragging on those last 20 hours sometimes, then they've overspent and over budgeted a game that probably would have been more successful had they, chopped off 100 million in the budget or something along those lines. But like I said, Game Pass in general, I think is that easier entry, that while things are always going to get more expensive everywhere, and gaming seems to be now the next one that's going to take that next leap, I guess. A subscription service seems like a much more appealing, approach, especially considering cable versus streaming service. Now, if you're like me, where you have 6 streaming services that you're paying for, you're almost at the price of cable. So it's like you feel like you won, but really you're probably a couple of steps behind, considering what the way cable is charged versus your 6 streaming services. But in any event, I think something like Game Pass will be that more tolerable pill to swallow, especially from a platform where you could play on an existing laptop or an existing tablet or your phone or the console you already have, or a cheaper version of that, or the app that's built into your TV. I think all of those things puts Xbox in a better position for the gamer that's not tied to a specific platform. And I know some people will say, hey, what about the digital library? Well, if they're the casual player and most of their digital library makes up of Madden, 2K, and COD, well, eventually all the CODs are going to be in Game Pass. And we see all the Maddens, especially if you do Game Pass Ultimate, winds up in that service. Now, somebody corrected me on it last one of the other podcasts we were on. If you're in PS Plus, you have the same access, at least for EA. And I think sometimes they get the 2Ks in there as well. So whether it's WWE of the previous year or 2K after like the playoffs and things like that winds up in the service. Subscription services might be that approach for those customers that just traditionally buy those year after year, although they rather be on the most recent version. But if everything is going up, gas, rent, whatever, then they might start cutting back. And it's like there were certain markets that are always secure no matter what the economy is. Like alcoholic beverages is another one. Not saying people should drink or shouldn't drink, but that's one that's always like a safe bet. Yeah, you might not buy the good stuff or the top tier or top shelf stuff. You might take it down a notch or whatever, but still have your beverage at the end of the day that you can enjoy. And if it means going from paying the full price for the game to either buying the game a little bit later on sale or getting in the subscription service, I think that's what some gamers will do. Some will continue to spend the high prices and just might do less of it. Others will just make cuts or be more surgical in how they approach their purchases or subscriptions and whatnot. But Xbox at this point, I can't see how they're blamed for any pricing for what Nintendo does. It's a free market, like we like to hear.
Yep.
People can companies can set the prices however they want. We, the consumers, can dictate if those prices are acceptable. If we don't buy it, then they either have to reconsider and drop the price, or they go out of business. And that's just the basic setup of it. But I don't know. I think this is a great opportunity for Xbox with their portable device, provided it's not well above the 600, but it comes down to where it's made and what it's going to cost as far as tariffs. If they can build those things in the U.S. and it not be $9,000, so be it. But if it's built elsewhere and it gets hit with a tariff and it doesn't break the bank too bad in comparison to building a PC, which since all those parts are sometimes made overseas as well, it would wind up breaking the bank even more. I think it's worthwhile. Which I'm one of those that will tell you, if you're ever interested in getting into PC without having all of the headaches of PC, the PC handhelds are probably the easier step, because you can hook those to a hub, hook it to a monitor or to your TV, almost like the way you do with the Switch with the dock. And you can either hook a keyboard and mouse to it, you can power the controllers to it, or connect controllers to it, however you want. That could be basically your PC, be it that it'll be a lower end one, but it'll be one that'll get you into the gaming space that you may not have experienced prior. So there's always that as well. But we'll see how things go between now and summertime. I think tariffs are going to make things a little bit tighter, but gamers are going to still, fork over cash for what they enjoy, and they just might do it a little less often, but they'll still do it.